Good morning, Eden Mennonite Church. Are you out there? All right. And can you hear me in the cars? Honk if you can. Yes. All right. Good. It is good to come here to worship God in God's creation here in this place. To gather knowing that God is with us and present and walking with us in these days. And we are glad to gather to worship together. Today we are going to be reflecting on our cloud of witnesses, those individuals who have shown us what faith looks like, knowing that God is walking with us on this journey. We are going to hear the biblical list of those who have walked by faith that the writer of Hebrews has given to us. And we'll also hear stories from our own faith community of people that have nourished our faith in our lives. Our scripture is from Hebrews 11:1 through 12:2, which I will be reading from the Shine On Story Bible. Faith is being able to believe in something that you cannot see with your eyes. Faith helps us understand that God made the world. There are many people of faith whose stories are told in the Bible. Noah was a person of faith. He believed God's warning and built an ark. Abraham and Sarah were people of faith. They obeyed God and journeyed to a new land, even though they did not know where they were headed. Moses was a person of faith. He listened when God called him to help the Israelite people. Moses led the people out of Egypt to the land God had prepared for them. Rahab was a woman of faith. She believed in God and sheltered some of the people of God in her home. Many other people of faith were named in the scriptures, like David and Samuel and the prophets. And there have been many others whose names we do not know, who also had faith and followed God, even when others made fun of them or persecuted them. There are also many stories about Jesus. Jesus was the pioneer of our faith. He did not give up when he knew he would die on the cross. Jesus knew that he would later have great joy. He is now with God. We are surrounded by a great cloud of people who have followed God. They have all run the race of faith. Let's get rid of anything that would weigh us down so that we also can run the race of faith. As we run, Jesus is always ahead of us. Jesus who shows us how to be people of faith. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So this Hebrews 11 passage is rich in lots and lots of characters that are named, many of whom I know, many of whom I had to look up in my Bible dictionary. So I encourage you to read through Hebrews 11:1 through 12:2 to see all the different examples of faith. As we were reading through it, Becky and I were reading through it this week, and we're just noticing all the different characteristics of what was going on with the different people, and the examples of faith that were given were faithfulness in giving offerings, faithfulness in being obedient, faithfulness in believing in a promise that they could not see. Faithfulness was believing in a promise that they not only couldn't see, but maybe wouldn't see in their earthly lifetime. Faithfulness was believing that life was more powerful than death. One fascinating description we read was the promise that Sarah believed that she would have children. It was said that she, being as good as dead, believed she would have children. Being as good as dead. meaning she was very old, meaning she was barren, meaning her life had no value in that culture because she could not have children. And yet she believed that life would overcome death. And of course we have the example of Jesus, the greatest example of life overcoming death. What I have invited folks to do over the last couple weeks is think about their own examples of faithfulness and to share those. So if you are one of those people who has prepared a paragraph or two, a minute, describing, naming that person, I invite you to come up to the front. What we'll do is just make a little line back here, a nice socially distanced line, and just one at a time folks can come up and share theirs. So if you would come up now, please do that, and make a little line back here, and then I'm going to keep talking while you walk up here, but you can come up here and prepare yourselves back behind me here. And this will be our focus today, is for us to be naming these folks for ourselves. I will read one, invite others to share, and then I will close at the end of our time. This is from a Becky King. Do I have that right? Becky King? Okay, Becky King says, "Joy was my high school conference youth minister and camp director who became a mentor and then a friend. I've learned through these years that Joy's faith is deep and wide, but what witnessing her faith has impressed upon me most is that Jesus loves with reckless abandon, and our lives are lived out of a response to that love. Joy lives in a way that is evidence of her faith and trust in that great love. She strives to help all those around her, in particular young people, get to experience and be transformed by that love."
My brother, James Youngke, known to many as Jim, comes to mind as one who is in my cloud of faithful witnesses. He's my oldest brother. I wouldn't say he was the favorite child, because that was my brother Bill, but but he certainly was. Jim was the golden boy, and he's been an example of faithfulness to Jesus in many ways. He has led a life of service and simplicity. When I was born, Jim was in Germany with the PAX program, and he later spent 3 years in Botswana, Africa with MCC. He was a professor of history at Bethel College and influenced countless students. He's authored many books, including one about living a people of two kingdoms, living in two kingdoms, and more recently about the missing piece in history, P-E-A-C-E, the missing piece in our history books. He's has had long-term involvement with prison ministry and long association with some inmates, and he has recently made some very deliberate dialogue with Muslims near and far to help facilitate understanding and love instead of fear. Overall, he's been an example to me of one who lives his faith with authenticity. He set the bar high in our family and inspires me to live with humility and authenticity as I follow Jesus.
My candidate for the cloud of witnesses is my grandmother, Anna Graber Gehring. She was born in 1881 in Freeman, South Dakota. Family lore says her parents, immigrants from Russia, now Ukraine, worked hard and did well. The family home was a large brick structure on a hill overlooking a lake. It was the site of many weddings and community picnics. When she was 19 years old, she left her loving family to be married to a 32-year-old immigrant pastor from central Kansas. The first pastor of Eden Mennonite Church. She must have wondered what God had in mind bringing her to the small farm west of Mound Ridge. In the early 1900s, it was not possible to go home to parents and brothers and sisters at just a whim. Besides the distance separating them, she had her duties as caregiver to aged parents-in-law. She was the minister's wife, which meant hospitality for all the visiting missionaries and conference leaders. Since there was no salary for her husband, the farm had to produce the family's living wages, the work of which often fell to her because her husband was busy with church work. She raised 5 children, including twin boys, and she often said she wouldn't wish twin boys on anyone. I think that was after they lit the upstairs curtains on fire, or maybe it was after they dismantled the kitchen stove. There were no fast food restaurants or prepackaged grocery meals. She sewed the family's clothing. To say she worked hard is an understatement, but I only remember her as a sweet, loving person, generous, who served her family, her community, and her God.
As long as I've got the mic, I want to first of all thank Sam. Every time I hear you sing, you remind me of your father, who I learned to know at college, and I so appreciate it. Thank you. I've always been inspired by those Christians who can share their faith through their actions to accompany their words. My wife, Bev, is one of those people. Her life has not always been easy, even before marrying me. Yet she shows Christ's love daily in the way she treats others and in the way she speaks of others. She likes to show how God beautifies the world we live in through nature by making our place a sanctuary for birds, butterflies, and all of God's wild creatures, except for mice. The time she spends in her garden is her time of sanctuary with God. We only regret that too often we fail to share our love with others.
One person that has joined my cloud of witnesses recently is Dorothy Nickel Friesen. Although retired from being an employed church pastor or leader, Dorothy has not retired from offering her gifts to the church. Over the past 3 years, Dorothy generously shared her time and wisdom with me in a mentoring role as I completed my seminary degree. Dorothy helped me understand and shape my identity as a pastor, sharing with me her experiences and insights from her 40 years of ministry. Like me, before becoming a pastor, Dorothy was a teacher, and so we found connections between our life stories. Dorothy was an empathetic listener, as well as offering words of counsel, constructive critique, affirmation, and encouragement. She expressed a vibrant faith and a deep love for the church, despite the challenges she encountered as one of the first women in spiritual leadership in the Mennonite Church. Throughout her life, Dorothy continued to say yes to new opportunities and lived into her calling as a follower of Jesus that took shape in a variety of leadership positions. It is a privilege to me to call her my friend, and I'm grateful for her generous spirit that has become an example for my life of ministry and faithfulness.
Her name was Anna. I was 18 years old when I became acquainted with her and her husband and family of 9 children. Anna and her husband were at the time members of the Eden Church. Her husband was not considered a pillar of the community. She always worked away from home, like school cook, cook in a local restaurant, or cooking at the senior center. Her life was hard, but she still believed, and her children were accustomed to church and Sunday school. She went about life with her twinkling eyes and happy smile, doing the best she could. At some point, her husband was excommunicated from Eden, but still, she believed and persevered. She took her 3 youngest children to another local church where everyone knew her situation and where each of the 3 children was baptized. It was hard, but still, she believed and persevered. When her husband died, her children helped her sell the farm and move to Moundridge. Toward the end of her life, she gave up driving and began attending still another local church, where she was convinced that she should be rebaptized and that it should be an immersed baptism. She notified all her children to invite them to the baptism. It was hard, but still she believed and persevered. She was a perfect example of faithfulness to me. She was my mother-in-law.
If a ship takes off from New York City headed for London, and that compass is just 1 degree off, by the time it gets to London, it'll be 570 miles off course. It was 1969. I was starting my junior year at Bethel College, and 6 weeks into it, one of the smarter things that I've done in my life, I dropped out. And I went to live with Harry and Alice Crable in their basement. And after a short time, on Sunday mornings, regardless of how late I'd been out Saturday night, Harry would come down into the basement and he'd walk over by the bed and he'd say, Larry, are you awake? Are you awake, Larry? And finally I go, yeah, I'm awake. Well, since you're awake, why don't you come to church with us? And I'd go to church with him. And Harry had a tremendous impact on my life. And looking back, it wasn't just Harry. It was Harry and Alice. And it was Harry and Alice and their family, because Val, their son, had a tremendous impact on my life. And when I came to church here at Eden, if it would not have been what I felt was an authentic church, I'd probably not come. But I found a deep, solid faith here. Not a flashy faith, not a wordy faith, but the kind of faith that goes for justice and peace. A get your hands dirty kind of faith. Harry'd come say, what you doing this weekend, Larry? Doing anything? No. Well, since you're not doing anything this weekend, why don't you come with me? A bunch of guys are going up to clean up after that tornado. And I went 2 or 3 times with Harry to Mennonite disaster service. I think that I can honestly say that Harry was no saint, and if you ask his niece Wanda over here, she'll probably verify that. But that was important to me too, because to be honest, I struggle with saint-like behavior. And it was important for me to see a man of faith could be a man of faith and not by any means perfect. So, maybe you know somebody in life that just needs that. Maybe it's only a half-degree bump or something. It wasn't a radical turnaround. But just that little bump needs a little bit of direction. Just try and be that person.
I'm going to read 2 more here that were submitted to me. This is from Eugene Gehring. I was trying to be a Sunday school teacher for the high school freshman sophomore class, This would have been in the mid to late 70s. Getting this age group excited to just express themselves regarding anything about Christian, social, religious issues is definitely, in my world, a success. One episode I recall was how do we demonstrate Christian faith to people we deal with on a regular basis? After sharing a few thoughts about what it meant, I asked the question, do you know someone in school or someone you encounter regularly which exemplifies Christian behavior and lifestyle? Within a few seconds, 3 or 4 students answered almost simultaneously, Mrs. Gehring. Now, this being Mound Ridge, it didn't exactly identify who they were referring to. I think it was their English teacher and drama coach at Mound Ridge High School. And by now I had figured out it was our close neighbor, Lorena Gehring? Lorena Gehring. The students expressed how she treated all the students respectfully, always willing to help, positive to everyone, making students feel good about themselves. Having grown up close to where she lived, my mother and Lorena being best of friends, I quickly realized she did represent what Christians should be to their fellow man. I remember thinking that was the ultimate compliment a teacher, or for that matter anyone, could receive from a 14, 15-year-old student. On the ladies' aids quilt, she is Mrs. Dan R. Gehring. Her daughters are Connie Geddert and a well-known Present Eden member, Danielle Gehring. I did relay this event to her children a few years later at Dan and Lorena's auction. That was from Eugene Gehring. And then Kristen Kaufman submitted this. When I think about people who are an example of faithfulness to me, the first thought that pops into my mind is my grandparents, Paul and Norma Graber. Their love for the Lord is strong and steadfast, never wavering or unsure. Grandma and Grandpa have gone through so much. A house fire when their children were young, a child with leukemia during her teenage years, many surgeries and health issues for Grandpa, as well as a heart attack. Another house fire when they were in their 70s, and the list goes on. They could have easily questioned God, getting frustrated with him or giving up hope. But instead, they always chose to turn towards him, trusting that he would pull them through each situation, praying earnestly about the trials they were facing. I remember how Grandpa would get teary-eyed when he talked about his love for the Lord and how God was with him during the highs and lows of life. They never, ever miss praying before a meal and thanking God. My grandparents are the most faithful people I know. I probably don't need to sum up, but it's kind of my job, so. Thank you for sharing those. Thank you very much for sharing those. It was deeply meaningful to hear the stories of faith and how people have influenced your lives and our lives. A couple things I noticed. Faithful people experienced triumph and success. Some faithful people experienced great suffering and loss. It seems to me that our circumstances don't control or dictate or describe our faith. Instead, our faith is proved by how we respond to our circumstances. And secondly, faith is actions, not simply a belief. I can say till I'm blue in the face that I believe that this podium will hold me up. And if I stand beside it while saying that, you'll wonder if my belief is really true. Faith is actions. Faith is responding with actions of love, of relationship to God, not simply a belief. And as Hebrews 11:1 sums it up, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Go in peace.